if you, just like that, if you raise your hand, we can't do anything about it other than see that your hand's raised. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll try to answer them. So Elder Tanner, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, then I will share my screen. Oh, you've got to stop. Whoever's got their screen shared. Sister Esplin. Maybe I took over anyway. Except that didn't work. That did. Okay, can you see my screen okay? Everything okay?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm glad to be here for another Sunday class from the Brigham Young University Family History Library. This week, we'll be talking about Jewish genealogical research. I might mention right at the beginning that my great-grandfather was Jewish, and I have Jewish line that goes back into the Netherlands. And so this was quite an interesting, discovery and a lot of research that went into making sure that line was correct. Well, the first thing I suggest as we get into doing any kind of ethnic research, or we're looking at a group of people, as some of your ancestors may have been any number of different kinds of groups of people who came to the United States. We had Germans in Pennsylvania, we had Swedes up in Wisconsin, we had all sorts of different kinds of immigrant ancestors. One large group of immigrant ancestors are people that are Jewish. And the first thing I would suggest is learn about your Jewish heritage and history. And if you do find you have a Jewish ancestor, or you know that already, then it would be a very good idea to start learning about how that all came about, what it is and what it means. And this is the Museum of the Jewish People, and I'll have quite a few URL addresses here in this particular presentation, because there are lots of websites that are going to be extremely helpful in doing Jewish research. So basically, once you get this particular website will give you over 5 million individuals, hundreds of thousands of images and films, archival research into the origins of Jewish family names and the histories of Jewish communities, and an abundance of music. So this is a good place to get started to learn about what it means to be Jewish and what it means to have a Jewish heritage. The important thing to understand right at the beginning is that there isn't any kind of universal Jewish background. There are some ethnic divisions of Judaism that have developed over millennium, over thousands of years. So these are different groups of people who all claim historic Jewish tradition, but have lived in different parts of the world. The first of these, and probably one of the largest groups, is the Ashkenazi group. They are the ones that settled in Central and Eastern Europe, and they are the ones that mostly speak Yiddish, which is a mixture of German and Hebrew. And that particular language originated in the 9th century. So it's been around a long time, and they are the Northern European Jews, the ones that live in the map area that's shown in the slide. The next group, our next most prominent group, are Sephardic Jews. They descended from people who were expelled from Spain in 1492, and in Portugal in 1496, in Italy 1490 and 1510. And these Jews spoke a version of Spanish called Ladino, and they settled in the Ottoman Empire, Netherlands, and the Holy Land. Sepharda means Spain and Ladino. So interestingly enough, excuse me, the Jews who settled in the Netherlands, who are my direct line ancestors, probably came from this exodus of the Jews from Spain, this forced removal from Spain. What happened in that was that, we'll get to that in just a minute in some more detail. The next group is the Romiat, and they are lived in Greece and Italy, and they've lived there for well over 2,000 years. And they trace their roots from the destruction of Jerusalem. And they speak a language called Yevanic and a Greek dialect, and they also speak modern Greek. So these are the Greek Jews. The Mitzrai are Jewish descendants of the local Jewish community in the Middle East. And so the Mitzrai is the most common used in Israel to refuted Jews who go back to Muslim majority countries. And they're almost usually mixed in with the Sephardic Jews. So there's the reason why we would look at all of these different ethnic groups should become obvious as I talk about them, because they all speak different languages. So when you do your research, if your family were Ashkenazi Jews, you're obviously going to learn German and Yiddish, or at least enough terms to do the research. And the same with all of these other groups, because they are going to be from that particular area of the world. One group which is less obvious and exists even up until today. In fact, there is a large group of these people who live in New Mexico in the United States. They're Marrano or crypto Jews. And they are Jews who, they're called crypto Jews because they were forced to convert to Christianity, but they did so basically reserving the right to do all of their Jewish traditions on their Jewish Sabbath on Saturdays. And so they were day to day, they were Christians. Their children were baptized in the Christian churches, and yet they preserved their culture underground, as it will, without any people having the knowledge that they were actually practicing Judaism. And it continued on from the time that they were forced out of Spain, particularly, and into the New World, and up until the present. And there are many people today, and there's a large community of a crypto-Jewish community nationwide in the United States. And if you start to investigate that, you'll find that there is a lot of information about them, and there's lots of stories about their lives and about what happened to them as they came to America. In order to understand why and how this happened, it's important to understand that there was the Alhambra Decree. It was called the Decreto de la Alhambra, or Edicto de Granada. It was an edict issued on 31 of March, 1492 by Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain, ordering the expulsion of all practicing Jews from the crowns of Castile and Aragon and its territories and possessions by 31st of 1492. You might recognize that date as being the date that Columbus sailed for America. And yes, Columbus did have Jewish sailors. There were Jewish sailors on Columbus's ship. The number depends on the different backgrounds. If you look into the history there, they've identified sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes more. And some people feel that probably a lot of the sailors were Jewish, because that was one way to get out of the country by July 31st of 1492. But that was a major turning point in that area of Europe and what happened. One of the things that you have to confront and basically absorb emotionally is that as you do your Jewish research, and as I did mine, become painfully and personally aware of the fact that your own relatives were the ones that were in the concentration camps. And the Holocaust is the English European way of saying it, but the Israeli and Jewish way is the Shoah. And so this is something that you just realize. As I was doing my descendancy research down, finding the descendants of the Jews from the Netherlands, it was became painfully aware that very, very, very many of them had died in 1943 at the same time, whole families. And it was it is a very difficult thing to face, that when you know that this was actually happening to your own relatives. One thing that you need to know for certain is that records were not destroyed in the Holocaust. It was not a destruction of records, it was a destruction of people. And so unless the library or archive was destroyed during World War II, consequently because of the warfare that went on, as we're seeing today, there's an extreme amount of warfare now going on in Europe, and those of us who are painfully aware of not only the human cost, but also the cost of all of the information and records of these people that are being destroyed. And this is something that's happened throughout our history, because we have many times when records have been destroyed during the wars. But there was nothing particular about the Holocaust that created a destruction of the records. So there are records, and they're very extensive records. In fact, there are records of nearly not all, but nearly all of the people who were killed in the Holocaust. So it's not a black hole. It's simply a very emotional and difficult time. And I have to emphasize that whenever I talk about an ethnic group, that Jewish genealogy or Afro-American genealogy or Spanish genealogy or German genealogy, it's all genealogy. And you have the same exact research skills as you do. You need to have the same exact research skills as you do with any other genealogical research. There's just no reason. You shouldn't say, well, I just don't know. I don't know anything about this. How can I? Well, I didn't know anything about genealogy when I started either, but after studying for years, then basically I picked up the information that I needed. And it's the same thing we go through every time we start in a new group or with a new avenue of research, because we have to learn the basic records that are available, how to translate those records into a language that we know, and we have to learn how to apply general basic research principles to doing our research and using the proper forms and things to record and substantiate all of the information that we find. So this is the same process. We're not talking about anything new or anything different, but you might need to know some Hebrew or Yiddish, or some other language, but there's always Google Translate. And so if you can copy the Hebrew into the Google Translate, it will give you a fairly good translation of what it says. It does have, it just like with doing research in any other language, it helps to know some basic genealogical vocabulary like birth, death, marriage, all of the various things that happen in a person's life. And those words and those things will become familiar. And I basically, I took about, well, almost 2 years of Hebrew at the university. I had a course, I had a couple of different courses, and one a couple of semesters or quarters at the University of Utah in biblical Hebrew. And I can tell you it's an interesting challenge. And I did learn quite a bit about Hebrew and about the background and all of that information during those classes. So it was one of the more interesting languages that I took. The YIVO Institute for Jewish Research is dedicated to preserving the history and culture. And this is another one of these expansive websites that has, in this case, more of a teaching website. And I put up a page from the Institute about learning Yiddish. And there's these are basically I'm finding a number of free complete courses for learning Hebrew online and for getting a basic understanding of the language. So it's something that you can pursue on your own. And if you have that interest or you want to get into Jewish research, then this is one avenue that's not going to be, not going to create a lot of money. You can spend money on courses. Some of the language courses that are on the internet today have Hebrew as one of the languages you can learn. This is a website called My Jewish Learning, and this one is more how to learn Hebrew rather than Yiddish. And so it's another way of getting into the language. The biggest obstacle for initially, it would seem to would be the non-English or non-Europe, non-Latin alphabet, and they're using the Hebrew alphabet. But surprisingly, that isn't the most difficult thing about the language. You get pretty much used to learning the letters and the sounds and being able to sound out the words. Even like with Spanish, some people can read Spanish but can't understand what they're saying. And that's sometimes the case with Hebrew, because it's phonetically, it's pretty well, pretty easily written and understood. So how do we get started? The same place you get started with any genealogical research. You start with yourself and you start adding in your ancestors. You can make your choices. You make your choices early. Some people focus on their surname line and go back on their father's father back and keep going. And then some people do their maternal lines and go back on their mother's line to all the mothers going back. Some people take a kind of universalistic view like I have in my past, and that is I just started with my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents and so forth, and just went back systematically on every line. And so far we've gone back 6 and 7 generations, and now we're working back further on almost every line. So start out by entering all the information you already know. Talk to all your known relatives and ask for information about your family. I had a friend a person that I got acquainted with, who's now my friend, that came to me some time ago and asked about his Jewish ancestry. And by just following some of these basic instructions, he has discovered a whole wealth of information about his family, primarily from living relatives that he identified through DNA testing, and had the courage that some of us don't have to call up on kind of cold call on relatives and ask them if they know anything about their family. So that is really kind of the basis of all of this, is that we have to start out with learning about as much as can be known about our family. In my case, for example, we went back, I had to be back to my great-grandparents before I discovered a person who I suspected was Jewish. And it took, I spent a lot of years just simply not looking at that particular line because I knew that I would get into some research that would become a bit of a challenge. And it turned out to be a little bit less of a challenge than I thought. But when I did start in doing the research, I realized very quickly that yes, as a matter of fact, they were very much Jewish, and that there was no question about that it wasn't at all an issue as to whether or not they were Jewish. So I think that it's something that you need to be able to do is gather information. Now, a lot of people come to me and they say, well, I don't have anything. I don't have any photographs. I don't have anything about my family. Well, you may not, but you need to make sure that you ask around and find out who has that. Once, I can tell you this for sure, that once you become established as that person in the family who wants the records, then they will start coming to you like you know, just out of the blue. I used to be teaching classes down in Mesa, have people walk in the door with boxes of records and say, "Is somebody named James Tanner here?" And they'd go, I go, "Yeah." And they'd say, "Oh." And then they'd tell me, "Well, I'm your, you know, second cousin, 2 generations removed or something. And I have all these records and I understand you're the one that wants them." And I have no idea how they got that information, but if you start asking, it's going to happen that you'll be able to find what there is. And if there truly isn't any, then it's up to you to be the one to start establishing and making sure that that information gets found and preserved. I would suggest first learning from the basic free resources. The first one is Jewish Genealogy Research, and this is in the Family Search Research Wiki. So if you go to the search tab on Family Search and click, the last entry is the Research Wiki, or the wiki, and if you go to that and put in Jewish genealogy or Jewish, it'll come up with this beginning website that'll get you into a description of all of the information that you can think of about where to go and what to do to begin Jewish genealogical research. The second good very good free research starting point is the Family History Guide under the ethnic part of the countries. If you go to countries link here in the Family History Guide and click, you'll see an ethnic, and in the ethnic groups, the Jewish research is one of those. And there is a very good outline giving you links out to the beginning websites and to other webinars and other instructions about how to do this research and the meaning of all of these different things. And when you're understanding this is that when you begin your search into an ethnic group of people that you perhaps personally are not acquainted with, if you're already Jewish and you already have a Jewish tradition and you have gone through and you're what they would call an active participant in Judaism, then you already have the basic cultural background. But if you get into, if this is something that you just learned about because you took a DNA test, or if you learn about this because you do your research like I did and find out that these people in your line were Jewish, then you may not have that cultural understanding and of the culture. I had another kind of unique experience, which helped me to understand and gave me the interest in by the way of studying Hebrew, among others, was that many of my friends when I was in grade school and high school were Jewish. I lived in a part of Phoenix, Arizona, where there was a very large Jewish population. And I would guess from my just my observation was that at least a third or more of my high school class was Jewish. And so I was sort of surrounded by it, and had many close friends who, I even had. I was even a little bit jealous sometimes because they did a lot of things that I thought would be a lot of fun, but they were involved in their Jewish traditions. So then I would suggest, if you're going to do any ethnic research, and if you're whether it's you're talking about any a specific group of people who have preserved their ethnicity, you need to build a family tree on more than one website, and you need it on at least the 3 main websites to get started, because Family Search, MyHeritage, and Ancestry all combined to provide more information about any one of these groups than any one of these websites alone. And if you simply try to work off of these websites for whatever reason that you don't want to work on Family Search or MyHeritage or Ancestry, then the question I'm asking is, why are you wasting so much of your time? Because these people have already collected huge amounts of information about particularly the Jewish traditions, and they're all there searching for them for you. They're all giving you record hints and giving you helps and research helps as they go along. And I just can't see how you can make any real progress without getting involved with with at least these 3 major websites. You can also go out to some others. There's European sites that are very helpful, and you may find out there's something else, some other website out there has got more information than any one of these 3. But this is where you get the basis for working ahead. And then I would suggest on top of that to take a DNA test, because at least a DNA test for one of these, and I would suggest at least 2, at least MyHeritage and Ancestry, because both of them will give you a different set of ancestors in a sense. They really do. It's you've got, all the names seem to be the same, but there are lots of people turning up on one or the other of the sites. In order for you to get a match on MyHeritage, you have to have someone who is registered on MyHeritage, and on Ancestry, someone who is registered on Ancestry. So those who are registered on Ancestry and not on MyHeritage and so forth are not going to show up. So each one of them will give you their set of people, and that may be the key to working your way through their genealogy. If there was one that I would choose, it would be MyHeritage, because they're the ones that are more specifically aimed at European countries. And Ancestry and Family Search have a lot of records in Europe and have a lot of records in the United States and every place else. So they're also helpful, but they're not actually focusing so much on gathering European records, particularly as MyHeritage has been and is. So Ancestry has its own Jewish family history collection of over 20 million Jewish historical documents. And so this is a place, they're a partner with Jewish Gen and some of the other big websites out there. And so they have acquired quite a few records, and they are a good place to start, one of the 3, and all 3, as I said. And also this will come up constantly. This is Jewish Gen, and this is the Jewish Genealogy website. It's generally recognized as being one of the largest and most involved websites for Jewish genealogy, and it would be probably a good place to start. What you're going to find now as kind of a caution here is that some of these websites are not free. If you want to get involved, you're going to be paying some money for a membership in these various websites. And so you need to be aware of that before you get in, and so you don't have the what we call sticker shock, find out that there's some expenses involved in doing this kind of research. I would mention this, that MyHeritage is adding millions of records from the Jewish Gen website. And so many, many records are coming over. Many more probably than have been added to Ancestry for a very good reason, because MyHeritage is headquartered in Tel Aviv, Israel, outside of Tel Aviv in Israel, and they are a Jewish company. And so their relationship with these people is probably more direct than the other companies. There's just, I'll summarize this at the end by saying there's just many more websites than we can possibly cover in the course of an hour. And the Jacob Rader Marcus Center for American Jewish Archives is another huge website, and lots of information. It's on the campus of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and has the American Jewish Archives. And it has 15 million pages of documents, audio-visual recordings, microfilm, and photographic images. So there's these huge organizations that have gathered up information in archives, specialized archives that focus on just this area of ethnic research. The next group is the American Jewish Historical Society, and they are a cultural archive in the United States, and they have 30 million documents and 50,000 books and photographs and art and artifacts. And they chronicle the Jewish presence since 1654 to the present, some of the earliest recorded times when Jews came to America. Coming to America is interesting because the New England colonies, particularly Massachusetts, were extremely exclusive. If you were not a Congregationalist as such, which meant following the exact religion of Massachusetts during those early years from 1620 into the mid and later part of the 1600s, and then on into almost 1700s, then you basically were not welcome. And many of those people even were persecuted, and a few were killed because they came to America and landed in the wrong place. And what happened to most of those people is that they fled out of the New England area. And where did they go? They went to Rhode Island, which was the harbor for all of the people who had contrary religious beliefs to the New England people. And so Rhode Island is basically the place where all of the non-Puritan Congregationalist religious people ended up, including all of the Baptists, and go down through the list of all the people who ended up in Rhode Island, Quakers, the Jewish people. And so that's kind of where you'll end up with some research, is a little bit further south in Rhode Island and from New England. This is not an archive. The Compendium of Jewish Genealogy is not an archive of such. It's a link. It's like a long list of all of the resources that are available. So there are, you've got thousands and thousands of resources on city levels in all of the different countries. So they're listing every country in the world, and they're listing where in that country you might find information about the Jewish people. Another area of the world where Jewish people went in large numbers was in South America, and particularly into Argentina. Argentina was very welcoming. Although it was a Catholic country, they still tolerated other religions. And so there were quite a few people who left the area of Germany and that area and ended up in Argentina. I watched a story of an Argentine Jewish family that began in Germany, went to France, had to leave France because they were Jewish, and went to North Africa and stayed in one of the North African countries for a while, and in Egypt, and then were thrown out of that country and ended up into Australia. So some of the movements of your Jewish ancestors may be a big challenge from a genealogical standpoint, because you may be searching in lots of different countries and trying to follow the track of how they managed to end up into to one of the countries in North or South America. Okay. So Archives.com has a Jewish genealogy and surnames page, and they may have a little bit more information. This is a big, it's a subscription website online, but it does have some specific information, and it is somewhat general, but it can be lead you to a lot of different types of information. So this is of Taino, and it's a website for Jewish DNA studies. You'll notice, if you look carefully at the slide, that it's in French. It can be translated into English, but you may run into that when you get into some of these websites, that their basic language is either in Hebrew or in English, or in French or in German or some other language. And fortunately, some of them do translate their website, at least partially, into English. And this is another website that you may, as you take a DNA test and you get your DNA, you may also want to put it into a direct, if you find you have Jewish ancestry, you want to put it in directly into a database of Jewish people, then that will be a way to get some beginnings of your research also. You often don't think, I think DNA people, when they talk about DNA, they get wrapped up in the jargon of DNA, and they don't, and they're starting to try to explain to you all of the things about all the segments and matching and all that kind of stuff. But what basically you get from a DNA study that has a database of people involved with it. If you just go get a DNA test from the company that doesn't have a family tree and a whole bunch of names associated, you get your raw DNA data, but that doesn't give you any particular genealogical information. When you do that with a big website like Ancestry or MyHeritage, then you get matches out to people who match you on your DNA. And if you start matching to people who are Jewish, if you contact your people and match those people that are Jewish, then you can begin to understand your Jewish relationships. It's a very interesting project, and it works for people who have immediate ancestors who were Jewish. It works very well. The further back your Jewish connection is in time, or any ethnic connection in time, the less likely you are to find matches even in the big websites, because you're not going to be able to identify all of the surnames of all the people who show up as your relatives, and determine which of those relatives are come from which lines. As DNA becomes more and more sophisticated, genealogical DNA becomes more and more sophisticated, the tools will be start to be developed that will help you to move back a number of generations. Right now, most of the DNA tests go back about 6 generations with accuracy. Anything beyond 6 gets so attenuated that it probably is not that reliable. And so getting to know the people that do show up and are related to you and end up in this particular database, for example, would help to clarify which lines you need to work on and which lines were actually related. And it's the bonus is if you find someone who has done a great deal of their own genealogy, and in that case, they may save you a great deal of time if you can tap into what's already been done. This is another foundation. This one focuses in the Eastern European countries of Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. And you will find that this is a genealogical and family history guide to Jewish and civil records in Eastern Europe. So if your family starts to be from Poland or Lithuania or one of these countries, you may very well find ancestral connections here, records here that will help you research that particular information. There are other websites that focus on Eastern European genealogy, but don't particularly focus on any one ethnic group. And so Eastern European genealogy has a huge area of resources beyond what you would normally think of if you just simply look through the catalogs of the websites like Ancestry and Family Search. There's many more records being collected by the groups themselves, the countries and the archives themselves. Okay, so as I said earlier, there's so many websites that I could go on. As long as I wanted to click, and as long as I wanted to continue to add links to websites, I could have done that and just kept this going indefinitely. There just doesn't seem to be much of an end to the actual archives and websites. You get into the numbers of thousands of websites that are helpful and may have additional information, as well as the other peripheral ones about learning languages and doing research in the country and in the countries and with the ethnic groups. So this is it's just kind of a challenge here. One of the things that I'll emphasize again is to take the time to contact the people that you discover through DNA testing or on the shared family trees. This is important depending on where you are in your genealogy. Let's take 2 extremes. Let's say you're starting out today and you know your parents and that's about it. It would be extremely helpful to you to get involved directly with Ancestry and Family Search and MyHeritage, because those 3 programs will very quickly help you get oriented as to where your family and who your family is, whether it's on any one of the 3 websites. And they will provide you with DNA, with matches. If you take a DNA test, that adds another layer of connection with people on both Ancestry and MyHeritage that will help you to get information about your family. A lot of people, I've talked to people over the years who came to me and said they knew nobody in their family. They were basically estranged from their from their parents and family and didn't know any of their cousins and didn't know anybody. And they are simply amazed when they go on to a program like MyHeritage and find out that they have dozens of first cousins or second cousins out there that they could talk to and find out about their ancestral family. So this is, and DNA is another tool for creating those connections. And it can be used as a research tool also. And when you start using DNA as a research tool, then you need to begin to understand more of the details about how that works, how DNA works. Now, very specifically, you need to watch out for name changes because, first of all, names were not changed at Ellis Island. That is one of the basic genealogical myths that floats around out there, is that they changed their name when they came to the country. The government made them take a new name. No, they did not. It never happened. But people did change their names when they came for the very simple reason that there was an extreme prejudice against the various immigrants population. So when an immigrant came to America from Eastern or Western Europe, and they had a name that was identified with a group, whether it was German or Jewish or further Eastern European or Russian or whatever they were, they often changed their name to make it anglicized, to make it fit in. And so the names changed and people assumed new names as they came into the country. And that becomes one of the initial challenges of determining the identity and of the immigrant. So the whole idea here is to keep learning and keep searching, because these records are extensive. There's a tremendous amount of information out there to learn. And the more you learn about yourself and your family and your ancestors, gives you more of a secure, let's say, anchor in a world where a lot of things don't make any sense anymore. Okay, well, thanks for watching. And let's see if we have
Elder Tanner, there's a question that's been up in the chat. Well, there's two now. There's one that's been up quite a while from the beginning in the question and answer Q&A.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay, I have a friend from Israel asked me to help her with family history search. She will find much more than I. Eventually, she's fluent in Hebrew. All the time, Family Search Limited to show us victims in the shared family tree. What's the current guide for adding these individuals to Family Search now? Unless they are your direct ancestors, then they'll simply not be added if they show up on the Shoah database. That's it. It's inevitable. I got the notice a couple of times simply because I was doing descendancy research, and I had people that were born in the 1860s and 70s, and they lived long enough to end up in the database. And so I got a notice that said stop. And so basically I stopped doing research at about 1880. And that was about as far close to the present as I could possibly get without having that run into it constantly. Unless you trace a line, of course, into America, in the United States or England or some other country, in which case, they were not part of that and they will not show up in the database. It's very obvious when they do, by the way, because you'll get a notice on it. There are websites that have all of the Holocaust databases. There's actually there's the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So there's places to go specifically for that information. And the guideline is they're not going to be added. So it's not going to happen.
There's another question that just came up too.
Yeah. What is a 5.6 ethnicity in MyHeritage for Ashkenazi Jewish? as well as a rare variant tell me a possible Jewish heritage. Well, your Jewish heritage goes back to Ashkenazi Jews. And so one of your probably great or great-great-grandparents was Jewish. And they could have had both great-grandparents Jewish, the husband and the wife. So you're looking pretty definitely on looking at that you will find someone back there who's Jewish. Okay, what else? It says, what's the easiest way for my friend to access the recording? Go to youtube.com and search for the BYU Family History Library, and you'll find all 600 plus, almost 700 of our recordings, and this will be up on there fairly soon.